Well, it really depends on the type of supply chain, lead times, and decision you want to make. So, for example, right now I'm working on a project where we want to look 28 days ahead because I'm working with a fashion retailer and they have 150 stores, and we need to know from the central DC how much they should ship to their store. So when you do that, actually just 1 or 2 weeks horizon is just good enough because you don't need to plan shipment to your store like 6 months in the future. Now, for some other industries, if you look, for example, at the pharma industry, they might want to have a 1 year and a half horizon because they need to give these forecasts and they plan to the supplier for raw material and so on. So, depending on your industry, depending on the decision you want to take, you might have a very different horizon.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Freight to the Point, a podcast by Zencargo. I'm Lucie Phillips, Chief Operations Officer at Zencargo, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Nicolas Vandeput, CEO and founder of SupChains. SupChains specializes in forecasting and inventory optimization, offering consultancy and training to its clients to support their supply chains. Together, we're going to delve into the intricacies of demand forecasting and inventory management, exploring the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. As AI continues to revolutionize industries, we will be uncovering its immense potential to elevate demand forecasting and how it's going to help businesses stay ahead of the curve. So, very warm welcome to Nicolas. Would you like to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Hello, thank you, Lucie, for the opportunity to be here with you. Yeah, sure. Well, I always like to introduce myself with the same ID. I'm generally someone who's passionate about inventory optimization and demand forecasting, and I'm only focusing on these two fields for the last, I think I've been doing that for the last 6 or 7 years, and I just plan on doing that for the next 30 years or so. So yeah, that's how I grow, and I'm trying to, so I have these two fields, and I'm trying to attack these two from different angles. I spend a lot of time creating content, article, books. I'm also teaching that at multiple universities. I'm training professionals with this, and I'm also creating my own models. So the same concept like demand forecasting, I'm gonna try to tackle it from many different point of views.
Great. Well, that sets us up nicely. It would be good if you could maybe start off by giving our audience a bit of an overview of what demand forecasting is and how it plays a role in effective inventory management.
Yeah, sure. So the way I see demand forecasting, for me, it's really like a supporting role where your objective is not to make decision, but it's to basically get information, get insights about what's lying ahead for your company. So basically, you're trying to predict the future so other people in your company can make decision. It could be decision related to, well, inventory, like how much to produce, how much to buy, how much to ship. But it also can be decisions such as should we hire new people, should we open a warehouse or move a factory, these kind of things. So the better you are at predicting the future, the better other people in your team, in your company can make decision. And for me, this kind of difference between people who are or processes who are responsible to just get information about the future versus processes and people who are responsible to make decision, it's quite important because what I see in many supply chain is that you get kind of a corrupted process where you have at the same time people pushing for some specific type of decision who are pushing the forecast in some specific direction. And we then say that the forecast is biased in the sense that it could get overly optimistic or pessimistic because people have incentive to push it in specific direction.
I see. And so how do you then, well, first of all, how do you assess which is the right forecast to be looking at, and how do you measure the accuracy of the demand forecast, and how do you even go about starting this? Like, how do you get the data to make sure that it is accurate?
Yeah. So the first thing with a forecast is really to understand that you only do this really because you want to support well other people, other teams in making the best possible decision. So I think the first step is really before even you try to assess, hey, is my forecast accurate? What kind of data I need? It's just to understand what kind of decision I'm supporting. And for example, what kind of granularity of information these people would need. So for example, let's imagine you want to help the production manager of a factory to plan for what they should produce next week. So it means that you might have to have like a weekly forecast per product, for example. And that's already very important because a lot of companies don't really do this step. And by default, they're going to, for example, measure accuracy per month, whereas the production facility and the logistic process works per day or weekly, right? So there is a discrepancy between what we are measuring, monthly accuracy, versus what we should be really doing, daily or weekly forecasts, right? So let's imagine you took the time to discuss with the various team you have to understand what they need to do and the kind of granularity of decisions they're making. Then you can move on to tracking accuracy. Now, something that's also critical, and I think some supply chain are still missing it, is when you forecast demand, you really have to forecast something I call the unconstrained demand from your clients. Okay, so in the sense that you really want to think, hey, how many products and what type of products and when do my clients want my products? Okay, rather than trying to forecast how much am I going to ship tomorrow, because how much you're going to ship or produce or sell tomorrow is very dependent on how much goods you have today. So it's constrained by your current inventory. But the forecast I'm advising to do are client and market oriented. It's more a question like, what does the market want? And then it's up to your team to deliver on this, right? So when we try to assess accuracy, we should really try only to do that based on the real requests from your client and the market versus comparing your forecast to what you actually delivered, which might be impacted by any kind of shortage. Um, One last word on this in terms of forecasting accuracy, and actually it gets very interesting, and that's why I love this subject so much. Um, you really have to mathematically get a bit into the detail on how you assess the accuracy of a forecast, and it gets a bit technical. And again, that's why I love this subject so much, because it's not just about accuracy, but it's also about being unbiased. So as I said earlier, you really need to ensure that overall your forecast over the midterm or long term, they're not overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, like you're always over forecasting by 10, 15%, or always under forecasting by 10 or 15%. And usually if you do that, it means that somewhere in your process, someone or one team has a direct incentive to push the forecast in a specific direction. So you need at the same time to measure the accuracy and to ensure that you're not biased.
That's really interesting. So I had two questions on that. I mean, and you're saying look at what the market wants rather than what you think you just necessarily need to ship. How far out do you recommend people look and when they're looking at that market forecast in order to inform their decisions?
Well, it really depends on the type of supply chain, lead times, and decision you want to make. So, for example, right now I'm working on a project where we want to look 28 days ahead because I'm working with a fashion retailer and they have 150 stores, and we need to know from the central DC how much they should ship to their store. So when you do that, actually just 1 or 2 weeks horizon is just good enough because you don't need to plan shipment to your store like 6 months in the future. Now, for some other industries, if you look, for example, at the pharma industry, they might want to have a 1 year and a half horizon because they need to give these forecasts and they plan to the supplier for raw material and so on. So depending on your industry, depending on the decision you want to take, you might have a very different horizon. Again, for me, when I start a project with a client, with a supply chain, when I train people, I'm always starting by the question, with the question, now look, we only do these forecasts to support other processes in making the right decision. The question is, what kind of decision are we supporting? If it's kind of long-term investment and you have suppliers that have, I don't know, 6 month lead time, then for sure you need to have very long forecast. But on the other side, if you just want to know what do you need to put in this truck that's leaving tomorrow to replenish one of your stores, you might just need the 1 or 2 weeks forecast.
Okay. So depends obviously on the industry, but it could vary, and you might want to do a slightly longer one, come in shorter one, but again, depends on the seasonality, the market. That makes sense.
Exactly.
And so when you were then also saying the second part question I had there about don't be too optimistic, don't be too pessimistic. How do you advise your customers to essentially put KPIs or any kind of indicator in their processes so that they can closely monitor that type of accuracy? Like, how do you spot where, say, one team is being more optimistic than another? How do you recommend they do that?
So actually, there is a framework that exactly does just that. So it's called, the name of this framework is called forecast value added. And the concept is kind of simple, and that's why I love it so much because it's simple, so people understand it easily and we can implement that easily. The idea is really that once you start generating a forecast, so normally the process of generating a forecast starts with you have a model, statistical, machine learning, maybe it's just an Excel file, but you have a model creating a baseline, and then different teams, different individual will enrich that. Well, based on various insights, right? So maybe the sales team, maybe one of your demand planner, maybe I don't know. A lot of people could interact with your forecast and enrich it and change it over time. Now, back in the days, let's put it like that, you as a manager, as a leader of this process, you would track the accuracy at the end of the road and say, well, overall, with this baseline forecast and all the enrichment we did, this is the accuracy and the bias we achieved. Now, the issue with that is you don't really know who did what. You don't really know if people were adding value, removing value, if people have been biased, if you have no idea. Now, with the forecast value added framework, the concept is very easy. We're going to track the accuracy achieved by every single person in the process. So we start with the software and we know, okay, once you get your baseline forecast out of this software, you get an accuracy of, let's say, 60%. Okay, great. And then you have maybe a few demand planners reviewing that and they increase the accuracy to 65%. That's amazing. That's great. And then they give it to the sales team. The sales team change it, but the accuracy drops to maybe 62% now, and the bias is kind of plus 5%. Now, if you just do that 1 month or 1 week, you don't really know where they're lucky, unlucky, maybe that was just a bad month. But if you do this over time, after 3, 6 months, and you see that consistently, the same kind of team always over or under forecast, then you know that, well, there is an issue with incentive because they tend to be, well, too optimistic or pessimistic. So typically what happens is maybe they get an incentive for beating the forecast. Maybe they say, well, if the forecast is 100 and I manage to sell 120, I get a bonus. So of course they have a direct incentive to reduce the forecast. It could be the other way around. Maybe they're thinking, okay, we always have shortages, so I cannot sell. So I'm going to increase the forecast. So I'm sure that they get enough supply and I'm able to sell to my clients. So I'm going to increase the forecast to 120 because people start to confuse the unconstrained demand forecast versus the supply plan, which are two different concepts. Again, if you don't track the forecast value added of every team and individuals, there is no way you can really basically assess who is adding value and who is not, which part of the process needs improvement. Now, as soon as you start to measuring this person by person or team by team, you can really start to go and have a discussion with these people because you can really identify who is biased.
So moving on to our second topic, let's talk a bit more about technology and machine learning. So as we all know, AI has become such a huge topic in the industry. And we'd love to know how it's played a role so far from your perspective in terms of demand forecasting, inventory management, and maybe some examples of where you've seen it improve efficiency to date.
Yeah, sure. So I'm lucky enough and to have been on this journey for AI for quite some time now. I started to use machine learning, I think it was in 2017 or 18, to forecast demand. And I think I was one of the first to publish about that because back in 2018, you didn't have so much resources online that you could read on how to apply machine learning to forecast demand. And that's how I ended up writing my first book, Data Science for Supply Chain Forecasting, where I was basically trying to explain to whoever wanted to read it, how can you make your own machine learning model to forecast demand? And I really did my best at trying to explain that the way I would have loved that someone explained it to me 1 year earlier. Now, of course, the technology evolved over the years, and every single year, what I see is machine learning is faster, machine learning is easier to use, and it's more accurate. Year after year, it's getting better. Statistical tools, so the one that most of software vendors are using right now, they are not, well, they're not evolving, to put it simply, or maybe the improvement is a tenth of a percent every year. So basically, you cannot expect as supply chain leader that statistical model are going to get better. And the statistical model you have today, you could have done the same 10 years or 15 years ago. It's exactly the same, basically. Now, with machine learning, again, every year it's getting better. And every year it seems for everyone that, well, that's the future. Now, why and how is it so much better? One of the things that machine learning is able to do, it's able to understand very complicated patterns in demand. And it's also extremely good at understanding the relationship between prices, promotion, shortages, pre-orders, inventory located at your client, historical demand, seasonality, discounts, all of that. You can mix all of that in machine learning, and machine learning makes sense out of it. You can also, as I said, I'm working on a retailer right now. You can also mix this with weather condition if you do short-term forecasting. You can mix this with opening hours of your stores. You can mix this with, is tomorrow going to be a Friday, a Saturday? Is it some holiday, or was it some holiday last week? Are we going to go on holiday next week? I mean, machine learning is able to deal with so much features and business driver that really do impact demand. So it's really amazing to see that as soon as you have a business that is promotion driven and historically had so many shortages that they're kind of attacking the quality of your demand data set, machine learning is able to make a lot of sense out of that. Statistical tool, I'm not saying that it's impossible to make sense out of that, but that would be dramatically difficult. Now, on top of that, and I would nearly say by default, well, if you know how to use it, machine learning is going to give you a 10 or 20% accuracy boost. Forecast error reduction to put it technically correctly, compared to statistical engines. So basically, machine learning today, even if you have no data, the simple fact that you start using these models, as long as you know how to use them, you're going to get an instant boost in terms of forecasting accuracy. And that's just wonderful. And again, the technology is growing. So what we get today in 5 years, the spread between the two technologies is only going to get wider. And that's quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next question. What do you think the future holds for the industry with the future potential of machine learning?
So for me, there is no doubt that companies that are able today to just, I would just say, structure the data in the sense that they can have a nice data set of this is our historical orders, historical pre-orders, this is our marketing plan, promotion plan for the next 12 months and for the last 5 years. We have access to all the transaction we did with all the prices for every single transaction, things like that. If today you are a supply chain, a business with such amount of data, there is no doubt that if you access the right machine learning capabilities, you can reduce your forecast error by 20 or 25% compared to statistical engines. And you can do this very easily in just like 1 month, you have it. And it's up and running. So definitely we will have more and more businesses who are able to kind of gather and structure this data and start leveraging that to generate this forecast. And they're going to get an instant boost in accuracy. Again, what's very important to understand is if you get better at predicting the future, and if you get 25% better at predicting the future, all the decision, every single decision your team's going to make about inventory, about sizing a warehouse, about opening a plant, every single decision is going to get better as well. And that's I think amazing.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Sadly, we are coming to the end of our time today. So I'll have one last question for you. And it's, do you have any final piece of wisdom or the advice you always give for any business that's striving to stay ahead in what is an increasingly competitive market? What's your one nugget that you like to give to your customers?
I think today, if you're the leader of a demand planning process and S&OP process, if you don't have already this forecast value added mindset that I just talked about, I think that would be your number one priority. Without this, I see that for me, I like to put it that this is like the foundation of demand planning excellence. If you don't have forecast value added, there is no way we can measure the added value of, for example, using machine learning of your team of anything. So the first thing you have to do is implement forecast value added. That's really my 101 advice for people.
Okay. Well, hopefully all of our listeners will take that away with them and keep that locked in their brain for their future strategy planning, which just brings me to the end of the podcast. And I want to say thank you so much, Nicolas, for your time and for your insights. It was really fascinating having this conversation with you today. And thank you so much to all of our listeners for joining us for another episode of Freight to the Point. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts if you enjoyed it. And if you do have any questions or feedback, then please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. We'd love to hear from you again soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lucie.